If you haven't read the entire story, you can check it out first. We continue at a police station where Detective Shul is consumed by a strange emptiness. He feels like something crucial is missing from his memory, but no matter how hard he tries to remember, the void in his heart only grows larger. A colleague offers him coffee, asking what's bothering him, but Shul brushes it off, telling himself he has work to do and can't afford to waste time being sad. Several suspects are brought into the station, all of them trembling uncontrollably. When questioned, they babble about monsters emerging from shadows. According to them, dark figures materialized from the ground and delivered terrifying ultimatums: surrender within 24 hours or face consequences worse than death. The suspects are clearly traumatized, screaming about how everything is their fault and begging for protection. Shul finds their stories bizarre and confusing. His colleague calls him into a meeting room, leaving the interrogations to junior officers. Inside, Shul is shocked when his superior announces plans to release all the suspects who turned themselves in. When he protests, another officer tells him to keep his voice down to avoid being overheard. The plan is simple but risky. They'll release the suspects and observe what happens over the next 24 hours. Shul argues that the suspects are clearly under the influence of drugs and spouting nonsense. However, his colleagues reveal that comprehensive drug tests conducted by the National Forensic Services came back completely clean. They point out the impossibility of multiple unrelated individuals experiencing identical hallucinations without any chemical influence. The higher-ups are pressuring them to find answers, and creating a controlled situation where the suspects can demonstrate their claims seems like their only option. When Shul worries about potential dangers, his colleagues laugh it off, mocking him for believing in supernatural nonsense. Despite their reassurances that nothing will happen and that discovering actual monsters would be beneficial for their investigation, Shul remains uneasy but volunteers to participate in the operation. The scene shifts to a warehouse where the suspects are held for observation. They're absolutely terrified, pleading desperately not to be used as bait and warning that they might die. The lead investigator tells them to remain calm while they conduct their experiment. With about 10 minutes left before the 24-hour deadline, the atmosphere grows tense and unnaturally cold. Shul notices something different about the air around them. As the deadline arrives, everyone watches their surroundings carefully, expecting something to happen. Initially, nothing occurs, and the suspects become confused about why the monsters haven't appeared. The lead investigator questions whether they were actually under the influence of something and demands the truth. The suspect insists that 4 of them witnessed the creatures. Then suddenly, Shul senses imminent danger and shouts a warning just as shadow-like figures launch their attack. 2 investigators are slammed against the wall and knocked unconscious. The suspect trembles in recognition as 3 ant-like shadow creatures surround them, their forms dripping with malevolent intent. The shadows charge forward, and blood splatters everywhere as the suspect is brutally torn apart, leaving only a severed hand behind. The creatures, now covered in blood, turn their attention to Shul with disturbing smiles. He's terrified but strangely puzzled by his own reaction. Somehow he knows these creatures are smiling despite their inhuman appearance, as if he's encountered similar situations before. Back at the station, the police chief is furious about the botched operation. He scolds the investigators for allowing the suspect to escape and getting themselves injured. When he questions Shul about his memories of the incident, the detective deliberately keeps his response vague, claiming he can't remember much detail. The chief orders complete silence about the encounter. Officially, they were investigating a gang in the Guro district and were injured in an accident during the operation. All the investigators nod in agreement, understanding the need for secrecy. Despite the cover-up, Shul becomes determined to uncover the truth behind these mysterious incidents. He reviews the cases of criminals who surrendered themselves due to encounters with shadow monsters. The data reveals a significant spike in self-reporting cases during late February and early March. His colleague explains that his aunt used to run a small book rental shop, and those months marked the beginning of the school season when business was typically slow. Shul files this information away, sensing it might be relevant to the pattern they're seeing. The final scene transitions to a school where students are walking to their classes. Among them is a familiar figure who appears to be our boy. Inside the principal's office, the principal expresses concern about a troublemaker transferring to their school. The teacher reassures him by reading the student's file, mentioning that his father is a firefighter and his mother is a housewife, plus his grades are decent, so there shouldn't be any major problems. However, the principal points out the concerning detail about the student leaving home for 2 years during middle school and questions whether they can handle such a student. The teacher confidently brushes off these concerns, saying they call him Viper for a reason and that he'll straighten out any troublemaker who comes his way. This teacher's name is Park Ji-Sol. The scene shifts to the school's track field during what appears to be an orientation. Viper is shouting at students when he notices the new transfer student, Jin-Woo. With a menacing expression, he thinks about how he'll turn this delinquent into an obedient sheep no matter how much trouble he's caused before. He immediately notices that Jin-Woo isn't dressed according to school regulations. Viper calls him out for wearing gloves improperly, but when he looks directly into Jin-Woo's eyes, his expression changes to confusion and then fear as sweat starts forming on his face. Jin-Woo simply turns to look at him, causing Viper to quickly back down and redirect his attention to other students instead. Sweating profusely, Viper wonders if he's just seeing things. Jin-Woo quietly tells his shadow that Viper must have seen them, wondering if this is some kind of influence he's having on this world. Later in the classroom, students are chatting when a guy approaches Jin-Woo's desk, asking if he's Sung Jin-Woo. He introduces himself as Oh Young-gil, explaining that they were middle school classmates as 2 other guys move in behind him. However, one of the other guys pushes Young-gil aside as they surround our boy's desk. Red Jacket questions whether Jin-Woo thinks he's some big shot for wearing gloves, while the others start mocking him about it. Jin-Woo realizes these guys are trying to establish a hierarchy and determine where he fits in the pecking order. He demands that Jin-Woo take off his glove so he can try it on, getting angry when Jin-Woo doesn't respond immediately. One of his lackeys suggests that maybe he's hiding a tattoo underneath. At this point, Baru asks for permission to tear these guys' limbs off, but Jin-Woo shushes him out. He begins removing his glove while the bullies watch in anticipation, but when he reveals his hand covered in severe burn marks, they're shocked. Jin-Woo thinks to himself that these scars are what he received from Antares. The bullies immediately tell him to put the glove back on, saying it might give them nightmares before quickly walking away. Jin-Woo tells Baru not to go after them, noting that it's nice being peaceful for once, though he decides to flex on them just a little bit. The bullies suddenly feel an overwhelming presence and stumble around before hitting the floor, looking around embarrassed while our boy gives a slight smile. As he walks down the hallway, Young-gil follows behind, commenting that he's changed a lot over the past 3 years. When Jin-Woo mentions that he's trained extensively, Young-gil asks if he plans to join a sports club. He responds that there is one club he wants to join. And the scene cuts to the track field where we meet Choi Tae-woong, the leader of the track and field team, as Jin-Woo expresses his desire to join. 3 intimidating students appear behind Tae-woong, commenting that it's unusual for a new student to want to join their team. Tae-woong asks if Jin-Woo is a recruited student athlete, but he admits he has no running experience. Another team member points out that they only accept scouted recruits and questions why someone without credentials would try to join. Jin-Woo explains that there's someone he wants to meet at a tournament. He thinks to himself about a girl who's still in middle school but skilled enough to make it to regionals. She was an excellent athlete who gave up her dreams to become a hunter instead, and Jin-Woo figures that joining the track team would give him a natural opportunity to encounter her at a tournament. Green Hair gets annoyed that Jin-Woo wants to compete in tournaments, but Tae-woong sets a condition. He points to a guy stretching nearby, explaining that he's a recruited second-year student athlete who's considered the worst on the team. If Jin-Woo can beat him, he can join the club. Jin-Woo observes the student, noting that while he looks skinny at first glance, his firm thighs and calves along with his confident aura suggest otherwise. He thinks to himself what a bold-faced lie this is, then tells Tae-woong he'll give it a shot. Green Hair internally mocks Jin-Woo for not recognizing who that person really is. Tae-woong explains the stakes. If Jin-Woo wins, he can join the team, but if he loses, he'll have to do their laundry for free for a month. Jin-Woo accepts confidently. In the school office, a teacher asks Viper if he's feeling better. Looking out the window, Viper sees Jin-Woo easily lapping the other team members and wonders what he's doing with them. A teacher, who happens to be the track team's supervisor, explains that they weren't trying to drive Jin-Woo away because he's too good. They wanted to test his endurance. He mentions that it's already Jin-Woo's 20th lap, which surprises him. He begins to wonder if Jin-Woo isn't actually a delinquent and that he might have gotten the wrong impression. Suddenly, he notices something strange around Jin-Woo again, shadows swirling around him. He frantically questions what the hell those things are and whether they're just hallucinations. Then a shadow moves up to the window and lets out a screech. He becomes terrified and passes out completely. Baru observes that this teacher must really be able to see them. We switch back to Shul and his junior sitting at a restaurant. His junior brings up the self-report case, wondering if he actually saw something that day. Shul's mind drifts back to the monsters he witnessed. Even though he can't be completely sure what he saw, they definitely looked like ants. His junior presses him about whether these creatures really appeared out of nowhere. Some random guy chimes in, asking if these monsters had ant heads but humanoid bodies. This catches Shul's attention immediately. Meanwhile, back at school, the track club is going all out during practice. Tae-woong pumps up his teammates, declaring their goal is to dominate the entire country. Young Gil is struggling hard, completely exhausted and barely keeping up with everyone else. Jin-Woo watches him and wonders why he'd even bother following along if it's this tough for him. Suddenly, he makes a subtle hand gesture. Young Gil instantly feels his body heating up, and before he knows it, he's blazing past all the seniors. The whole team gets fired up watching this. From a window above, Viper stares down at the scene, his mind consumed with thoughts about the shadow monsters. It turns out, he was actually the random guy from the restaurant who approached Shul. Shul had asked him to share more details about what he knew. Jin-Woo notices that Viper has been openly watching him for the past few days. Bellion suggests just erasing his memories, but he decides they'll keep observing him for now. Back to Shul, who's still obsessing over the self-reporting incident and Viper. He feels like there's some connection between all these incidents, but it's all just gut instinct at this point. Based on what he learned from Viper, he's trying to figure out how to approach Jin-Woo about this. He imagines himself directly asking Jin-Woo about monsters, but realizes he'd probably come across as a complete lunatic. As he's lost in thought, he notices a shadow behind him. Fear creeps in as he stares at it. There's definitely something lurking in this school. Jin-Woo wonders if Shul can actually see the shadow sentry he posted there. Even though Shul doesn't have his memories from the previous timeline, his sharp instincts are still intact, which impresses Jin-Woo. Shul makes his way to Jin-Woo's classroom and asks the teacher if he can borrow the student for a moment. His classmates immediately start gossiping, wondering what kind of trouble he might be in. Out in the hallway, Shul apologizes for pulling him out of class. Jin-Woo reflects on how it's been decades since he last saw Shul, counting all the time he spent wandering through dimensional rifts. He feels genuinely happy to see him again, but knows it would be weird to say that out loud. Shul studies him carefully, thinking something feels different about this kid. How could a high school student have eyes like that? He decides to cut straight to the chase and asks if Jin-Woo knows anything about ants. He pulls out a sketch of an ant creature and shows it to him. Without hesitation, Jin-Woo confirms he's seen something like that. This catches Shul completely off guard. He frantically asks what he knows about it and who he really is. But seeing his own intense reaction, he forces himself to calm down since he's been chasing this case for so long. To his disappointment, Jin-Woo casually dismisses it as just some monster from those cheesy special effects dramas. Feeling embarrassed and let down, Shul takes back his notebook and thanks him for his time. But Jin-Woo asks if he can keep the drawing as a memento of their meeting, and Shul hands it over. Igris questions why he didn't tell him the truth. Jin-Woo responds that sometimes forgetfulness is a blessing, even when it's artificially created. Back in the classroom, students are buzzing with curiosity. 3 girls surround our boy, demanding to know why an investigator was looking for him. He brushes it off, saying the guy is just someone he knows. One girl asks if he's really buff and whether he works out. Their conversation gets interrupted when the red jacket bully and his crew show up. He's trying to start trouble again, asking if Jin-Woo wants to settle things right now. But before anything can escalate, someone grabs him from behind. It's Tae-woong and the other club members stepping in. They make it clear they won't tolerate anyone messing with their boy. Jin-Woo asks what they're doing there, and Tae-woong explains there's going to be a welcome party for the new members. He asks if he and Young Gil are free today. Jin-Woo confirms he is. The club members escort the bullies away to teach them a proper lesson. After school, as they're walking together, someone calls out Jin-Woo's name. It's Shul again, asking if they can talk for just a moment. Tae-woong tells our boy not to be late for the party as the group continues without him. Jin-Woo warns Shul that he can't talk for very long. But then Shul looks at him with an emotional expression and says that he was right. It really is him. After their encounter yesterday, Jin-Woo wonders if it was a mistake. As Shul walks down the stairs, he suddenly hears a voice in his head asking if he trusts him. Confused and looking around to see nothing, he responds that he does trust whoever is speaking, wondering what's about to happen. That's when Jin-Woo decides to restore all of Shul's lost memories. The flood of information hits him hard, memories connecting past, present, and future. He sees visions of a forgotten world through Jin-Woo's eyes, along with stories about gates, monsters, hunters, rulers, and monarchs. The name Sung Jin-Woo keeps echoing in his mind, and he realizes this is the same student he just met. Overwhelmed by these impossible revelations, he struggles to accept what he's experiencing. In the present, both men take a walk through the park. Shul asks how long he's been fighting those creatures in the dimensional gaps. According to the records, he disappeared for 2 years, but the problems he's been dealing with couldn't possibly be solved in such a short time. The answer shocks him: 27 years. When asked if he has any regrets, Jin-Woo firmly states he doesn't and would make the same choice again if given the opportunity. Shul observes that he seems to be enjoying his current life. Jin-Woo agrees, though he mentions the only annoying part is constantly having to change his appearance since he can't age anymore. When asked about future plans, he admits he hasn't thought that far ahead. Shul suggests joining the National Police Force, but Jin-Woo jokes that if he became a cop, the other officers wouldn't have anything to do. Shul explains that's exactly what they're working toward, a world like that. After considering it, Jin-Woo says he'll think about the offer. As they part ways, Shul mentions he'll be waiting for an answer, but Jin-Woo can't resist commenting about the terrible pay and heavy workload he's heard about. Time passes, and in late April, something unprecedented happens. A panicked man calls the emergency center, sweating profusely as he tries to explain what he's witnessing. The operator asks if he's lost, but that's not why he's calling. When they offer to dispatch personnel, he struggles to find the words to describe what's happening. He mentions cracks appearing everywhere, something about to shatter. The confused operator wonders what buildings could be collapsing in the desert and asks where these cracks are located. His terrifying response: the sky itself is crumbling. Meanwhile, Jin-Woo is doing homework late at night when he suddenly senses something ominous approaching. Inside a cafe, he meets with one of the rulers to discuss the situation. He asks if this dimensional disturbance is their doing, but the ruler denies it, explaining that these methods of crossing dimensions are completely different from theirs. When pressed for information about who might be coming, the ruler reveals they're outsiders who recently entered their world. After being driven out by the heavens, they've now set their sights on Earth. Jin-Woo wants to know why they're targeting this world. The ruler explains they're a race of giants who consume rocks from planets capable of sustaining life. Vicious beings known as Titans, and they're definitely not allies. Our boy realizes this situation occurred before when the cup of reincarnation was used. The ruler confirms that his previous warning about avoiding their world invasion referred to the timeline that no longer exists. Jin-Woo understands he's the cause of this crisis. The ruler continues explaining that the Titans are following traces of the monarch, and they have already deployed an army. But Jin-Woo knows it's too late for conventional solutions. Even if they could create a connecting gate right now, it would take years to mobilize properly, and by then everything would be over. With cold determination, he declares he'll handle them personally. In the western United States desert, the government has cordoned off the affected area and brought in every expert available, but none can provide meaningful answers. A scientist with over 30 years of experience studying strange weather patterns admits this is unlike anything he's ever encountered. A colonel confidently states they'll deal with whatever emerges, but suddenly soldiers notice their heavy weapons and vehicles being flung around by a purple glow. The source reveals itself to be Jin-Woo, who calmly explains that conventional weapons won't work against the Titans. With the stage now set, he can sense the fierce hunger of enemies who want to devour Earth. Their presence grows stronger as they draw closer. His shadow army begins emerging from the ground, preparing for battle. As the dimensional rift widens and the threat becomes imminent, Jin-Woo stands ready to face what's coming. The enemies are about to encounter not just any opponent, but both a monarch and a hunter combined into one unstoppable force. A soldier stood there completely terrified and confused about what was happening around him. The colonel looked up at the cracked sky as it began swirling ominously above them. Suddenly, massive titans emerged from the dimensional rift, pulling themselves through and ready for battle. One of the titans spoke up, questioning if Jin-Woo really thought he could stop all of them by himself. Jin-Woo coldly responded that he is not alone at all. Right on cue, his shadow army materialized, eager and ready for war. Both sides stared each other down intensely. Without wasting any more time, the battle was about to begin. Meanwhile, inside the White House, the U.S. president was deep in thought about the rifts appearing in the sky and the unidentified objects emerging from them. This was an unprecedented crisis, and he wondered if it was right to keep this information from the citizens. Walking down the hallway, he asked if what the colonel was telling him was really true. The colonel assured him he would explain everything in the conference room. Inside, they watched surveillance footage captured by drones and robots showing Jin-Woo and his shadow army. Everyone was completely confused, wondering what they were looking at. They questioned who this person was and whether he was just a civilian standing in the middle of those creatures. Colonel Harrison admitted that he would like to know the answers himself. Back at the battle, Tusk began readying his spell. A brilliant light started emanating from his body before he released a devastating fire spell directly at the Titans. In a straight line, every Titan caught in the attack was instantly incinerated. Both sides were shocked by the sheer power displayed. The real battle finally began as Jin-Woo sprang into action while his shadow army swarmed over the Titans. With precise and swift movements, he sliced through his enemies with ease. Floating above the battlefield, he conjured javelin-like shadows and rained them down on his opponents below. Some shadow arrows headed toward an older-looking Titan, but he managed to block them effortlessly. As he declared that this wasn't enough to take them down, Jin-Woo immediately followed up with a massive claw-like shadow attack, swiping at him with devastating force. As the dust settled from the attack, a new Titan appeared, commenting that even a small planet like this had quite useful talent. However, he noted that since Jin-Woo had to increase his body size to maximize power, they were still primitive beings. In contrast, the Titans decreased their size when they decided to fight at full power. Arrogantly, he claimed that such abilities were only possible because they were the greatest warriors in existence. This turned out to be the same old-looking Titan from before. But suddenly, a shadow blade rushed forward and struck him. Bellion appeared and cut his head clean off, proving he was just a pushover after all. Bellion asked Jin-Woo if he had been talking to that weakling. Jin-Woo responded that these Titans were far too arrogant for their own good. They then went completely wild and started stomping on the remaining enemies. Back in the conference room, the president asked if they had uncovered Jin-Woo's identity yet. He noted how this person dealt with those monsters like they were mere toys, thinking that something straight out of the movies was actually happening in reality. David Brennan, director of the CIA, wondered aloud about the situation. He said that realistically, it might be impossible to figure out who this person was through conventional means. However, he suggested they could employ some unrealistic methods instead, which surprised the president. David explained that there was a certain person who could inform them of truths that no one else would know, Madame Norma Selner. Just like before, she would guide them to the right answer. The scene shifted to the National Student Athletic Tournament qualifiers. Jin-Woo was there with his club members when he spotted someone in the crowd. It was a guy who was incredibly built and muscular. The person seemed to have noticed him too, getting slightly distracted from whatever he was doing. Someone behind him shouted that he should continue to focus on his warm-up. Jin-Woo muttered under his breath, wondering if it could really be iron. Someone calls out to Tae-woong, and this guy appears to be another total goofball. He begins mocking Tae-woong, suggesting that his team must be weak if they're relying on a first year as their ace player. However, Tae-woong fires back, saying they won't be able to keep their jaws from dropping once they see what Jin-Woo is truly capable of. The goofball just laughs it off, saying he's got some good jokes. Then he mentions that they also have their own freak, freshman, and tells the guy to introduce himself. but we can see that this guy is literally sweating bullets. His name is Cheol, and he's getting a strange impulse, like he wants to kneel before someone his own age, even though they've never met before, all while staring directly at Jin-Woo. We also see Iron peering from the ground with a knowing smile on his face. Cheol wonders if he's actually scared as he clenches his fist. He shouts that this is ridiculous and tells everyone not to make him laugh. The goofball behind him asks what's wrong with him. Cheol thinks to himself that there's no way he's afraid of this tiny guy. He figures it's just because he didn't eat breakfast and got dizzy. Then he directly asks Jin-Woo what the hell he's looking at. Jin-Woo's club members start getting all hyped up, but Tae-woong tells them to focus on the actual competition. Jin-Woo calmly replies that nothing's going to happen. Later on, things escalate and Cheol confronts Jin-Woo by grabbing his shirt and lifting him off the ground. He tells him that he's not some pushover who can be messed with. The shadows, including Iron, are actually happy to see Cheol again. But then something completely unexpected happens. Cheol suddenly starts tearing up out of nowhere. He's utterly confused by his own reaction and ends up kneeling down. As Jin-Woo begins to walk away, he thinks to himself that since Cheol is now living as a human, there's no reason for him to have any deep connection with him anymore. But then Cheol calls out for him to wait and suddenly asks if this is what people call love. Jin-Woo is like, of all the nonsense you could have said, you chose that. Then he snaps his fingers and implants a fake memory into Cheol's mind. The memory makes it seem like Cheol tried to pick a fight with him, but then they coincidentally discovered that Jin-Woo was the son of his father's friend's friend's friend. That's how they resolved their differences, and now Cheol should just be good from now on. As Jin-Woo walks away, Cheol is left standing there completely confused about what just happened to him. In the US, David goes to visit Madame Selner. She greets him and invites him inside. He can smell food cooking and asks if she's eating. She tells him that she's actually entertaining another guest at the moment. David says he'll get straight to the point so he can leave quickly, but she says that ever since that person visited her, she can no longer see the future. He asks if this is about that story regarding the god of death again. Norma just looks at him and smiles mysteriously. She tells him that the answer to his first question is yes, and to his second question is no. David is confused as to how she could know what he wanted to ask if she can't see the future anymore. She explains that the answers he's looking for are actually matters of the past, not the future. She simply took a glimpse at a portion of that past and gave him the answers he needed, as she offered him some tea. She knows about the person he's trying to figure out, but she won't divulge any information about him. David raises his voice and says she should already know what that person has done. They can't just let someone like that run around freely. David remembers it clearly. A single human stood his ground without taking even one step back while facing those terrifying monsters. Even though his powers were incredibly strong, he definitely saved all of humanity that day. She reveals that this incident wasn't actually the first time something like this had happened. David gives her a surprised look and asks if she's saying humanity was at risk of complete destruction several times without anyone even being aware of it. He asks her one final question: if that man isn't actually a dangerous individual. She guarantees that he's not dangerous at all. David says he understands and that he'll pretend he never heard any of this conversation. She tries to offer him some cookies, but David politely declines and says he'll come visit again sometime. After he leaves, we see another man saying he doesn't like that old man at all. He asks Norma if he should teach David a lesson. It's our guy Thomas. She reminds him that his competition license would be revoked if he caused another incident outside the ring. He mentions that a lot of people die from accidents, but he was able to avoid them and stay alive thanks to her prophecies. He wants to know why she saved him that day. She tells him it's because he did many good things in his past life. Thomas is surprised by this answer, since he's usually called the bad boy or the devil of the UFC. Looking out the window at David getting into his car, Thomas asks what the man in the video did that made him come to see her. She simply says that he saved the world. Thomas thinks to himself that sometimes he can't tell if she's joking or being serious, but that's exactly why it's fun being around her. He asks what that hero is doing right now. She says she wonders about that too, and suggests that maybe he's just enjoying his youth to the fullest somewhere out there. The preliminaries are about to begin, and all the athletes have gathered on the field. We see Hae-in getting ready for her race, and it's obvious she's about to dominate everyone. The starting gun fires, and they're off. Hae-in has a lightning-fast start. All the other runners are giving their best effort, but she's slowly pulling ahead toward first place. As she approaches the finish line, she uses every last ounce of energy to surge past the competition and crosses the line first. She wins and secures her victory, a brief but hard-earned triumph. After the race ends, Hae-in sits under a tree by herself. She removes her sock, revealing an injury on her foot. She thinks to herself that while she managed to get past the first round of preliminaries, she wonders if she'll be able to run the remaining races with this injury, and it frustrates her. Suddenly, Jin-Woo appears behind her and asks if she plans to cover up her injury and continue training. Hae-in turns around, and their eyes meet. She wonders if he's an athlete from the track and field team. Our boy warns her that if she ignores her injuries and keeps running, she might end up spending an entire year in physical therapy. She could become a third-rate athlete and regret that decision for the rest of her life. However, he quickly adds that he's just talking about someone he knows. Hae-in notices his scent and thinks it's pleasant. As she thanks him for his concern, her injury suddenly flares up with pain. He tells her to stay still for a moment as he reaches toward her foot. Hae-in immediately exclaims in embarrassment. To her surprise, Jin-Woo heals her injury completely. He tells her she only has one shot at this, so she should run without any regrets. As he prepares to leave, she calls out for him to wait and questions whether they've met somewhere before. He cryptically responds by saying they should run, which confuses her. He proposes that if she can race against him and win just once, then he'll tell her everything. But she points out that he's in the high school division and that she's seen him compete and take first place every single time. He responded saying he'll take that as her giving up. But Hae-in isn't backing down. She mentions the record for the preliminaries that's about to be set. If she can break it, then he has to tell her. Jin-Woo thinks to himself that whether she's younger or older, she's still exactly the same. And so, he agrees to her challenge. Time passes by. Jin-Woo enjoys his high school years to the fullest. He spends time with his friends, participates in club activities, meets up with Hae-in regularly, and studies hard for his college entrance exam. Looking at his phone, he realizes it's almost Christmas Eve. On a bustling street, Jin-Woo walks along wondering if he dressed too plainly. As he passed a nearby storefront, he spots a mannequin sharply dressed in stylish clothes. After a quick glance, he makes the decision to copy the look. He asks his shadows on his appearance, and everyone compliments him. Just as he turned back toward the street, someone called out from behind. Our boy turns around, and it's Hae-in. She comments that it almost feels like he has eyes in the back of his head sometimes. She congratulates him for passing his college entrance exam and asks if he's going to attend the university he selected. But she wonders why he insists on going to that particular school, mentioning that he's got excellent scores. Jin-Woo explains that he received a full scholarship and the opportunity to study abroad is an added bonus. Besides, there's someone he absolutely has to meet at that place. Hae-in asks if that person could perhaps be a woman. Jin-Woo smirks and responds that he wonders about that too. Hae-in pouts at his evasive answer. She asks if he remembers their promise. Jin-Woo pretends not to know what promise she's talking about. She reminds him about the one where he would tell her everything if she wins a race. She suggests they make another bet and see who can race to that Christmas tree first. He wonders what she's planning to ask him, acting so determined like this. She declares that she wants to know everything, what he thinks about sometimes, whether it's a guy or girl he wants to meet at that university, and if they had met before that competition took place. Our boy looks slightly surprised but agrees to the challenge. Hae-in removes her scarf and wraps it around Jin-Woo's neck, telling him that if he likes her, he shouldn't move from his spot. Jin-Woo stammers in confusion as Hae-in takes off running. His shadows begin commenting on the situation, clearly amused by what's happening. Hae-in gets closer and closer to the Christmas tree as Jin-Woo remembers all their shared memories, the time they first met, her confession, and everything in between. He smiles warmly at these recollections. And finally, Hae-in reaches the tree and declares her victory. Jin-Woo tells his shadows to close their eyes, and the moment ends with a passionate kiss shared between them. In the world of repose where Jin-Woo's shadows reside, we see Tusk being warmly welcomed by everyone as Baru walks through the hallways looking genuinely happy. Tusk mentions that Baru must have completed his task, and sure enough, Baru presents him with a robe that looks exactly like what Jin-Woo had worn just days before. When Tusk asks how he can repay him, Baru simply says that as long as he's satisfied with it, that's all that matters. After putting on the robe, Tusk expresses how much he loves it. Baru then notices the orb in Tusk's hand and suggests it would be better to turn it into a staff rather than carrying it around. Tusk thinks this is a brilliant idea and decides to entrust the dwarves in the back with this task. This shadow world is infinitely vast, housing close to 10 million soldiers who all live together, assisting one another. They're all deeply connected to Jin-Woo's mind, and as he grows stronger, they begin to resemble his thoughts and personality. This means that even those who once desired only destruction are now starting to learn the more humane aspects of life. Throughout this world, we see soldiers sleeping, training, chatting, and even getting into heated arguments where they grab each other by the collar. Their previously non-existent personalities are beginning to form, and they're starting to live in this world with incredible diversity. Above all else, they genuinely adore Jin-Woo. When the staff is finally completed, Tusk finds it absolutely beautiful. Looking up, he spots 3 large shadows asking who they are. They explain that Bellion had told them to come to this place. Tusk realizes these must be magic soldiers among the new recruits and thinks it's somewhat wasteful for beings of their size to be casting magic, though he catches himself, remembering that he's also quite large. As he tries to describe his accomplishments in detail to the newcomers, someone appears asking why they're all loitering around. Tusk turns back, clearly annoyed, and tries to act tough by demanding to know who dares say he's loitering, especially when he's showing off his new robe. However, when he sees it's Igris, he immediately calms down and expresses his love for him. Igris thanks him for his constant loyalty and explains that it's about to begin soon. All those above general grade should cheer for their liege. As they look out the window, Tusk is shocked by what he sees. They witness Jin-Woo and Haeun's first meeting in this timeline, and all the shadows rejoice at the sight. However, Igris simply stares, lost in his own memories. The scene shifts to him reflecting on his past. The place where he first met Jin-Woo was a strange dimension created by the monarch's power. His mission had been to test him because the monarch wanted to see if he was worthy enough to become his vessel. At that moment, he knew this would be the final order the monarch would ever give him, and he was already preparing himself for farewell from his previous liege. Since the monarch's orders were absolute, he could only follow them. So there he stood, alone in that strange dimension, ready to test Jin-Woo's qualifications with most of his original powers sealed away. He realizes that people in this world call such places dungeons and looks at himself, seeing his appearance from before he encountered his current liege. That architect had been able to create this stage using his liege's power. Sitting on his throne, he senses Jin-Woo's presence just beyond the door and decides to wait for him there in a commanding pose. However, he then wonders if this might come across as too arrogant or disrespectful, considering the human he's about to test carries the consciousness of his liege within him. It feels strange to show himself sitting on the throne before his actual liege. The door opens, and Jin-Woo arrives for the challenge. Hiding behind a pillar, Igris observes him carefully, having no intention of being negligent in this battle. If Jin-Woo proves insufficient, he will die by his hands. He emerges and faces him as the blood-red commander Igris, ready to test whether he's worthy of the throne. As the battle begins, the results are initially disappointing. Jin-Woo is busy dodging his sword attacks without possessing the abilities he had before his death. However, Igris notices that he's planning to defeat him with his bare hands, which he finds impressively courageous for a human. He admires his gaze but questions whether his skills match his determination. Unfortunately, Igris finds the performance disappointing as he beats down Jin-Woo, wondering how someone like this could possibly possess the qualifications to become his liege's vessel. He tells him to give up, calling him weak and unfit for this position. Preparing to deliver an honorable death by beheading him, Igris reasons that if he doesn't possess the qualifications, then his liege would be able to remain as he is for a bit longer. Just as he's about to strike the fatal blow, Jin-Woo blocks it with his bare hands, leaving Igris genuinely surprised. Our boy declares that it's not over yet and stabs Igris in the eye. He can't believe he's about to be defeated by a human much weaker than himself, but as he looks into Jin-Woo's eyes, he understands something profound. Despite having higher stats, he's still lost. Whether it was due to carelessness or Jin-Woo's incredible tenacity of never giving up, he wasn't entirely sure. What he did know was that Jin-Woo had come to cherish him, and there were countless moments when he felt thankful for his kindness. To him, our boy became not just a master, but also a friend and comrade. They fought many battles together, and his loyalty deepened while his longing for his previous master began to fade. Slowly, he came to fully accept his new liege. His forces became significantly more powerful after the addition of the original Shadow Legion, and Bellion, who was once his old comrade, finally joined them. However, the joy of their reunion quickly passed as Bellion began to be influenced by his loyal teammates. When Bellion suggested placing the black flag he carried atop the castle because their liege might like it, Igris questioned if he was being serious. Their determination proved crucial in the battle against the monarchs. As Jin-Woo gradually became more skillful in combat, they all became much stronger as well. After about 30 years, all enemies were annihilated, leaving only the Legion of Destruction. A dragon confronted Igris, shouting that he was once the wings of the Shadow Army, yet now he follows the orders of a monarch who was once a mere human, asking if he had no shame. Igris admitted that the dragon was right and that he had forgotten his origins. His time with his new master had been so honorable that he had lived completely forgetting his previous life, wondering when exactly this transformation had occurred. He reflected on this as a blessing of forgetfulness, realizing there was no need to overthink it. He hadn't truly forgotten his previous liege, but he remained a knight, the sword of his current liege, and one of the wings leading the Shadow Army. As such, we go back to our boy's house where he's studying for his college entrance exam. Igris points out that the answer to question 14 isn't 1, but 2. Thinking that who else would assist his liege but him? Bellion is only as big as a mountain, and Baru is just an insect, no matter how intelligent he might be. Only he, who graduated from the Knight Academy with top scores, could properly help. However, when Jin-Woo checks the answer, question 14 clearly shows 1 as the correct answer. He asks if Igris would risk his life on it being 2, and after checking the book, Igris admits that his discipline is still lacking. Since Jin-Woo has stepped into a new battlefield, he thinks his glorified life will continue for quite a bit longer. Gates. They are massive portals that summon dangerous monsters into the world. When hunters defeat a dungeon boss, they have exactly 1 hour to escape before the gate closes permanently. We see a man failing this crucial escape and becoming trapped in the dimensional rift. While stuck between worlds, the rulers contacted him and granted him their power to combat the monarchs. The greatest fragment of brilliant light then gave him one final mission: protect the Shadow Monarch. He reveals that this is why he wanted to help Jin-Woo all along. Too ashamed of his current state, he had avoided showing himself to his son. Through tears, he expresses his regret and longing, telling Jin-Woo how much he missed him and how proud he is of the man he's become. As his form begins to fade, he apologizes for not being a better father and wishes they could have talked longer. Back in their apartment, Jin-Woo's mother calls out to him. When his father asks what's troubling him, Jin-Woo can only manage to say the word "father" as he looks at him. His dad notices the formal address and questions it, prompting Jin-Woo to tear up. He says he must have had a nightmare. Il-hwan looks at his boy and, silently, begins to cry, hiding his face behind his newspaper. The scene shifts to a cafe where Il-hwan meets with one of the rulers. He informs him that the Shadow Monarch has chosen to remain in this world, as every moment he spends here is precious. When asked if he'll continue hiding the truth from his son, Il-hwan confirms this decision, explaining that Jin-Woo wants everyone to forget the past. The ruler announces that once he departs, there will be no more interventions from their kind. This truly marks the end of their involvement. He expresses gratitude on behalf of all rulers to both Sung Il-hwan and his son, Sung Jin-Woo. When offered assistance, Il-hwan makes an unexpected request. He wants his memories of the past erased. The ruler questions this choice, and Il-hwan explains that maintaining a facade around his son would be too difficult. He simply wants to be an ordinary father who worries about his child. To him, Jin-Woo isn't the powerful Shadow Monarch, but just his precious son. Understanding the request, the ruler begins the memory erasure process. Once Il-hwan leaves the cafe, all traces of the vanished timeline will disappear from his mind. He wishes him a peaceful future. We then jump to a college freshman welcome party where we meet Jin-Ho, looking nervous at his first university social event. Despite coming from a wealthy family, Something about the frozen pork belly restaurant feels strangely familiar to him. His senior tries to cheer him up and warns him about maintaining proper behavior around other upperclassmen. He mentions one particularly intimidating senior in their major, not someone who's harsh with juniors, but whose presence commands respect. Jin-Woo wonders if anyone could compare to his own father's authority. The conversation turns to Cha Hae-in, a recent campus celebrity known for her athletic achievements. The senior reveals that she's dating the intimidating upperclassman they were discussing. Just then, Jin-Woo arrives at the party. Noticing how empty their table is, Jin-Woo considers moving to where they are. When he sits with them, the other senior quickly excuses himself. Jin-Woo offers Jin-Ho a drink, and he panics, thinking he's expected to down a full glass of soju. But after drinking, he's relieved to discover it's just cider. Jin-Woo points out that someone who can't handle alcohol shouldn't be discussing drinking and tells him to drop the formal sunbae title in favor of Hyung. Jin-Ho finds himself confused by how naturally Hyung-nim rolls off his tongue and wonders when he ever mentioned his name to Jin-Woo. Despite the confusion, they share a toast. Time passes and Jin-Woo walks across campus while Jin-Ho calls him, questioning his absence from the student lounge. Jin-Woo explains he had other matters to attend to and asks Jin-Ho to cover for him at an afternoon lecture. Jin-Ho protests that he's too popular with professors to skip, but Jin-Woo simply leaves the task to him. Meanwhile, Joo-hee walks nearby, grateful for qualifying for a Seoul university, but self-conscious about her Busan accent. When she spots Jin-Woo passing by, she impulsively calls out to him, asking if they've met before. He barely turns his head to deny knowing her before continuing on his way. Embarrassed by her own boldness, Joo-hee wonders why she approached a stranger and worries that he might think she was trying to recruit him for some cult. Jin-Woo glances back at her as she stands there mortified. The scene transitions to a hospital room where an elderly man asks his doctor for help getting up. The doctor notices a mysterious bottle and inquires about it. He explains that a young man had visited recently and left it behind, somehow bypassing all security undetected. The man had claimed they once fought monsters together and brought this gift as repayment for past events. He appeared and disappeared like a mirage, as if he had never existed. According to him, drinking the contents would instantly cure his illness. The doctor expresses disbelief, but Chairman Gun-hee admits he's grown tired of fighting his condition. Regardless of whether the cure is real or fake, he asks how much time he has left without it. He tells the doctor that if something happens after drinking it, they can put that on his tombstone. Without hesitation, Gun-hee opens the bottle and drinks the entire elixir before settling in to rest. As time passes, sunlight streams through the hospital window, illuminating his recovering form. He remarks that despite the approaching winter, the sunlight still feels pleasantly warm. But that's where this video ends. Remember to like and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.